Hi everyone, thanks for joining me today. I'm Trish Triumpho Sullivan, and I'm going to do a lecture on printmaking today. So let's get started. The ability to create multiples of an image literally changed the world. Imagine having to hand copy or write a book or hand draw illustrations one by one. Crazily tedious, right? We are so used to things printed in great quantities, like books, posters, postcards, billboards, newspapers. It's kind of hard for us to grasp how hard this must have been, how much work it must have been back in those days, and just how revolutionary it was for books to be accessible to many more people, more than just a select few, such as, people in power, like say kings or clergy people. The Chinese invented both paper and printing. And even though movable type made it possible to easily print text, artists still needed to copy artwork for illustrations by hand onto printing plates. So a ton of work. Once technology improved this process and photochemical methods of reproduction were developed in the late 1800s, handwork by artists decreased. And in the book printing world anyway, they decreased. Artists saw an opportunity here also to make artwork accessible to more people, a wider audience, so to speak. By having the ability to make multiples of an original artwork, called, which we call these original prints. Let's see if this will work so I can show. Got printmaking, original prints. So they were called original prints, and now everyone could afford an artwork in their own home, or almost everyone. The point is that while in the past only a select few could afford original artworks, kings, nobility, places of worship, suddenly large quantities of one artwork could be produced at a much lower cost. So it's the difference between painting one original painting and having a print that you can make hundreds of at the same time. So original prints are not reproductions. Reproductions are something different. We'll talk about that again. They are a type of artwork that is usually created to have many multiples, or we'll call it siblings. Okay? And is usually created at the same. They're created at the same time, during the same process. They're usually numbered to indicate the number of prints, what they call pulled. Right? These are the prints that are pulled off of the plate or pulled off of the press, so they call them pulled, or printed in that edition. So when we're looking at that, we can see. We'll take a look at this. So the number of prints that are pulled equals an addition. And so there's like that fraction. So the number 3 in this case is the number of the print, the actual print, out of 100 total prints. Okay. Oh, and we'll talk about this in a sec. So when testing the so they're numbered in sequence. Thus, the numbers you see on the bottom of an original print that look like a fraction show the number of the print coming off the press and how many were printed at that time in that edition. Okay. When testing the process, the artist usually keeps the first few that meet the standard that they're looking for, and they will be marked AP, or artist proof. Okay, so we've got artist proof there. There are 4 basic types of printmaking. There's relief. Oh, looks like I'm missing a paper here. Whoop, there we go. Okay, so there are 4 basic types. There's relief, intaglio, and stencil. Right, and we'll talk about these wood cuts and wood blocks and what registered means. So I wrote these out for you so you can have a little bit of info on those. So relief, intaglio, and stencil. So stencil is usually screen printing. And I forgot planographic. So planographic is also called lithography. So planographic and lithography are also, or planographic / lithography are also another type of printmaking. So let's talk about relief first. So in this process, the artist cuts away all parts of the printing surface not meant to carry ink. Right, so the only parts that are sticking up are where the ink is going to touch it. So this design to be printed is in relief. They call it in relief, okay, at the original level of the surface. These relief processes include wood cuts or wood blocks, lino cuts or linoleum cuts, and wood engraving. So you may be familiar with rubber stamps, right? You've seen rubber stamps. That is a relief printing. So that's a pretty easy thought of visualization to get the idea of what relief printing is. Marks left from wet car tires or even fingerprints are examples of relief printing. So your fingerprint's a relief print. Traditionally, wood cuts are made of soft wood. And I'm going to show this to you really quick. So here's linoleum cuts or lino cuts. All right, so that gives you that. What? There we go. Traditionally, wood cuts are made of soft wood, cut along the grain, and it lends itself to really bold black and white designs. Color can be used, but it's generally placed on separate blocks and carved to fill spots on the design with color placement. Carefully lined up, or what they call registered. So registered means that when you use more than one wood block, you want to make sure that that the next ones, the ones say with color or different parts of the design on it, you want to make sure that they are lined up properly with the first one that you printed, so that you're printing on top of each one, or like rubber stamping, say on top of each one. But so it has to be lined up properly or registered. Otherwise, you'll have it looking like it's off a little bit. Woodblock printing originated in China, and the desire to spread the word about teaching Buddha is influenced the type of prints being produced. So this one back here, and let's see if we can get this. I think there's one in your book like this as well, but you can kind of see it in the background there. This is the Diamond Sutra. It's one of the oldest surviving prints from the year 868, so it's Chinese, and was distributed for free to spread the Buddhist religion. Here you can see Buddha is preaching to a crowd, and you'll also see that there's what looks like a swastika on Buddha's chest. But just so you know, this symbol was an ancient symbol of enlightenment, just like that same symbol that Native Americans used in their art, where it represents humanity, life, and healing. It's the rotation of life, the stars, the moon, the sun, the equinox, the 4 directions, plus up and down. It's the rotation of Mother Earth. All of that is what it means in say, Native American religion. It is rarely used today in Native American art or in Chinese art because of the Nazi use of that symbol They called it the rolling log symbol, is what the Native Americans called it. And you'll sometimes see that represented in old art, pre 1940 or 1930s art in Native American art. Japanese artists made really great use of printing, of woodblock prints anyway. This is Hokusai's work, and it uses color. And each color is used. They had to, out of necessity, use a separate block to put each color in. Check out the detail. It was one of 36 prints showing Mount Fuji. Here, the huge waves make the mountain seem pretty small and totally dwarfs the fishing boat. And this is from 1830. It still holds up today as really great art. I'd hang it on my wall. In contrast, we'll look at this print by Nolde. It has very little detail. So when you look at this, it's not very detailed. It's simplified, yet very expressive. And while I appreciate the artwork, it's not as much to my taste as, say, as this one, as the wave is. The wave's pretty amazing. I like that one a lot. So we'll talk about linoleum cuts or lino cuts. They're more modern than wood, and they're softer and easier to cut. They work the same way. An artist gouges out an area not to be printed, and then the area that's left sticking up is going to be the one that takes the ink for printing. Here's an example here. It's Sharecropper by Catlett, and it demonstrates that linoleum can be cut in multiple directions, unlike wood, which pretty much has to be cut along the grain, along the way the wood grain moves. And it's really easy to use. This artist has devoted her art to creating dignified images of African Americans, and so this is meant to be a very dignified image. So now we're going to move on. We'll talk. So this is wood. This is still wood relief printing. So we had wood block or wood cut, and lino cut or linoleum cut. A couple different kinds of wood of that relief type printing. So now we'll talk about. Oh, and here, this is an example of it. You can kind of see it here, where you can see where only the raised areas that get the ink on them, and the ones that were gouged out stay clean without ink. So that gives you an idea of what the relief process looks like. You would put paper on top of it and press it down or put it through a roller in order to transfer the ink onto the paper, to the surface. So let's move on here. And then here's Intaglio. So Intaglio, you'll see the paper, and the ink goes into the surfaces underneath. So let's talk about that. It's completely opposite. Intaglio is completely opposite of relief printing. In this process, the areas below the surface hold the ink. The term intaglio comes from the Italian word intagliare, which means to cut into. The image is cut or scratched into a metal surface by steel or diamond tools, or it can be etched with acid. Then the surface has a viscous or thick ink applied, and the excess is wiped off, leaving only the ink that's in the grooves that were already cut. So the ink resting in the scratches or grooves, and then they place paper which has been dampened just a little bit on top, and then they are both pressed through a heavy roller. The paper picks up the ink in the etched surface, below the surface, I guess I should say, the etched below the surface area, and a print is created. You can tell this type of process by the characteristic plate mark that goes around the outside of the print. You'll see it around the edges of the print. You'll see like a plate mark there. So copper plates were the original metal, but now other metals are used, some like zinc, steel, aluminum, even plastic is used sometimes. Engraving and etching are two of the main intaglio processes. So let's talk about engraving first. So engraving, and here's an example of an engraving. This is Albrecht Dürer. Grew out of inscribing and decorating jewelry, believe it or not. So you think about people taking a ring and writing something on the inside of the ring, or decorating metal with some, kind of arabesque characters. So it's when engraving is when lines are cut into the polished surface with a special process. It's really difficult, and it takes a lot of strength to get a really clean, precise line. Rough edges must be smoothed out with a scraper. So you can get a lot of detail, but it's a lot of work. An example of this process is our paper money, right? If you look at a dollar bill or any bill, you can see what engraving looks like, and you can see how much detail can be in those little tiny lines in an engraving. The small engraving by Albrecht Dürer behind us here, it contains thousands of delicate lines, very precise and detailed. By contrast, the lines in an etching are not as precise and delicate because the process of creating the metal plate with the image is much easier. The artist prepares the metal with a ground. It's like a coating of acid, or acid resistance material, and then draws on that surface with a sharp tool that exposes the metal underneath. Then the metal is exposed to acid, and the acid eats into the metal where the artist has scratched. Depending on how long the acid is left on, the grooves can be shallow or deep. Since it's an easier process than engraving, the lines are generally more relaxed and regular. And irregular. Let's take a look here. So here's an example of an etching by Rembrandt. He skillfully used this medium to create a composition with a wide range of values, which, remember, values is light and dark, or light and shadow, that draws attention to the main subject, in this case, Jesus. What other eye directors, when we talked about eye directors, when we talked about the design process or the principles of design, what other eye director devices did Rembrandt use in this composition? Any thoughts, guys? We'll give you a hint before we finish up. If you think about the faces of the people looking at the main figure there, and also the fact that we have a lot of light area kind of leading almost in a triangle shape up to him, so it's kind of pointing at him, and everyone's looking at him. So we have him as being the lightest, and then the middle, and also some other devices, eye director devices that let it go. So let's talk about another etching process. There's another etching process called acquaint, and this process allows one to create shaded areas in black and white or color prints. It uses acid-resistant spray paint to create kind of a gradient effect from the acid etching process. This has to be combined with a more traditional line etching, and we'll look at how. I'll show you an example really quick of one that I think is. While we're waiting for me to do that, I'll hold this up so we can see the different types of intaglio. We've got intaglio, engraving, etching, and we talked about a ground and then acquaint. So we're going to talk about acquaint right now. Okay. And let's talk just a sec about this. And I'm going to hold up the book because I don't think I have a picture of it in my thing. But I want you to see this piece by Francisco Goya. Okay. And this is an example of acquaint. And you can see that there's some definitely some shading in the sky and in the foreground. And this is called the disasters of war. And this is one of the things we talk about with printmaking, is that it did allow people to comment on things that were happening at that very moment. So the disasters of war was done with a quaint technique. So the sky and ground shading kind of shows that. Excuse me. So if mass-produced relief and intaglio, like etching and engraving art, opened up a whole new world and access for people to art, lithography, on the other hand, was a game changer. It started 200 to 300 years after the first the relief and intaglio were going on in the early 1800s. So finally, we had an inexpensive and easy method that allowed an artist to draw directly on the printing surface. So there was no cutting into the plate. It's called planographic or surface printing, and also lithography, right? So for this lithographic process, it is based on the premise that oil and water don't mix. Let me repeat that. Oil and water don't mix. In this process, the artist uses what they call litho crayons or pencils, or sometimes a greasy liquid called tush is painted on with a brush. So you can paint it on with a brush if you want to. And we're looking at a couple different examples of this here. They're painted on to Bavarian limestone or a metal plate. So once and the metal plate has to have the same kind of characteristics as the stone does, so it won't really work. So first, once the image is done, once the artist has drawn or painted what they want on there, it's fixed. They call it fixed or treated. And here, well, let me put this up. This is lithography, planographic, and tush. We can see that. And then we'll talk about screen printing and silk screening as well. I lost my place here where we need to be at. So it's treated with, once the image is done, it's fixed, which means they try to make it so it doesn't move around at all, right? With a bit of what they call gum arabic. And remember that? It's the resin from the acacia tree. We talked about it as being a binder and some paints. So it's either treated with gum arabic or acid to kind of fix the image. And then the surface is sprayed with water, and it's inked with an oil-based ink. And remember we said oil and water don't mix? Well, that's exactly why this works so well. The water tends to be repelled by, or the ink, I'm sorry. The ink tends to be repelled by the water, but it sticks to the greasy drawing that the artist did already, whether they used the litho pencils or the paint, the tush. So it sticks to that greasy drawing, and the paper is applied to the surface, and then it's rolled through a press, and the image is transferred to the paper. So it sounds complicated, but it's not. It's one of the easiest processes, and its reproducibility freed artists from rich patrons, governments, and the church. Now they could afford to work on what they wanted, not what some like king's portrait or something they weren't really interested in, but had to do it to survive, to eat. It was new in the early 1800s, and its impact on society was huge. It was, like I said, a game changer. So finally, they had a quick, easy, and cheap way for artists to share their art with a wider audience. It also provided illustrations for newspapers, posters, handbills, before the invention of the modern printing press. This meant important information could be shared almost immediately. Let's take a look here. Let's see if we can. So we can see that here in this in this one that this lithograph, it looks almost like it's done with pencil or pen. So when you take a look at it, it reflects the artist's feelings and works as a photograph would today. What do you think is happening in this image? What's happening here? Take a close look. Once again, the artist has used light and dark in a really great way to highlight a particular part and to develop some drama. Let me tell you about it really quickly. It's a record of an 1834 event in Paris where someone in an apartment building reported a gunshot in the middle of the night, and government soldiers came and killed everyone residing in the complex, men, women, and children. You can see a little baby's head poking out from underneath the father, another child over here, and what looks like a woman lying dead. So all these people in this artwork are dead. They're unfortunately, it made the public, this image, this lithograph, this print, made the public aware of what the government was doing. And so, yeah, it's a game changer, all right. But lithography, it was also used for fun. It was used for posters to advertise everything. Oh, and here's, this kind of shows the lithography. You can see the stone, you can see the ink and the paper, and then it would be run through or either a roller or using a squeegee to press down to get the ink to transfer it to the paper. So it was also used for fun things, posters to advertise nightclubs, bicycles, entertainers, and a lot more. This print is by Henri Toulouse-Lautrec, and it was. And let me see. We'll look at this one. So this is the print, and it was based on a photograph, right there. So it was based on a photograph of dancer Jane Arville, and you can see how the artist changed the pose. So look at how awkward this looks. So he changed the pose to look less awkward and give more of a sense of movement. So you can see from here to here, definitely looks a little less awkward and feels a little bit more like moving. And then you have the final example where it gives a feeling of a fun night out. It's the first example of modern art. Put that in quotes, modern art. Screen printing or silk screening, and I'll hold this up so you can see screen printing and silk screening. Okay. Is also very simple and based on stenciling, like really simple. We've all seen stencils before, and that's what screen printing is based on, right? And in screen printing, and we'll talk about this, it's an ancient technique that was improved in the early 1900s by adhering a stencil to fabric stretched across a wooden frame, right? Today, it's synthetic fabric is used, but because silk was originally the fabric used, it's mostly known as silk screening or serigraphy. Seri is Latin for silk, so we know that. So how it works is the screen is placed on top of the surface to be printed, and then ink is pushed through the screen with a squeegee, just like the ones we use to clean windows. It works great for images with one color, and if you want more colors, you can create separate screens, just like block printing. So here you see the thing to be printed, the silk screen, the ink, and the squeegee. Screen printing. So it works great for images with one color, like I said. And the difference between one big difference between silk screening and relief intaglio and the lithographic processes is the image does not need to be flipped or mirrored for it to print in the correct orientation. So with the other ones, you have to actually draw it backwards in order for it to come out looking correctly. So it's like a mirror image you have to draw. A variation is called photo screen, where photographic light-sensitive gelatin is used to create the image. And let's take a quick look here. This one is a silk screen poster that was done during the grape, the big grape strike, or the boycott of grapes, I should say. It was the great boycott, when workers were protesting because of all the real dangerous chemicals used and how they felt like they weren't getting protection. And whoever was buying these products wasn't protected either. People were eating stuff that had like a lot of nasty chemicals in them. So this poster was to raise public awareness of what exactly was going on. And it says Sun Mad raisins, unnaturally grown with insecticides, miticides, herbicides, and fungicides. And this is by Esther Hernandez from 1982. So really interesting. Let's take a quick look here. So some artists no longer use limited editions, such as this one. This is one who feels like makes as many prints as she wants. And now we have digital technology, and we can create on the computer in a myriad of ways. We can print out a ton of copies, or we can distribute electronically, like Gilbert and George. Let's see if I have a Gilbert and George here. No, maybe I don't. Okay, well, we'll go back to that one. Well, Gilbert and George made prints of their art available online for downloading just for a limited time, which I think was kind of interesting. It's a different process. Instead of having a limited number, limited time to download. Here we'll look at this one. So this is Mr. Terrific. It's one of a panel of, or one panel, I should say, one panel out of 60 panels of the complete artwork. So the complete artwork had 60 of these, and this is just one example of that, that comprised the work. And the entire work was entitled Deluxe, and this artist did a run of 20, so 20 of the complete artwork. And the artwork has 60 panels in it. So this one is entitled, that was entitled Deluxe. It made a statement about color and race, if you want to say race. The artist found old 50s and 60s magazine ads that encouraged people of color to look more white, basically to kind of erase their color. And the idea of wanting to be something you're not is a big deal, and I think this artist says it really well. And this is done with more printing. Let's see, we'll see this one. So we have this artist. This is Ivana Kaser, and she created 8-page newspapers on various subjects and left them in her gallery for people to take for free. These were subjects that mattered to her. Each newspaper wasn't like a newspaper we think of. It was something that she created, and it's her opinions and her writing, her artwork in it, and then she would share it with the general public in an area where they didn't really have a lot of newspapers or a lot of information about these different subjects. But nevertheless, important subjects like migration. In this case, this is called Migrants, and talks about the fear of newcomers. So let's see, this artist combined both digital and print techniques using traditional woodcut and digital printing to question kind of stereotypical representations of women, and did a really good job with it. This is kind of a combination of ancient methods and new methods of printmaking. So this is the lecture on printmaking, and I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you got something out of it, and we will see you next lecture. Thank you very much.